Amen. If you would, go ahead and turn your Bibles to Matthew chapter 8. Matthew chapter 8. I do have the notes in the YouVersion. If you are using that today there, you can follow along there as well. I thought about this morning. I was trying to think, how I wanted to kind of start off the message today, and I began thinking about the entirety of this message and in regards to our lives, and I was thinking about personally my own life. There's a lot of things that are going on. This week, just some conversations I've had with family. My parents are aging, and there's some conversation I had this week, and it's always you have to have those difficult conversations, but you begin to think back on life and think back on things that happen in your life. But for me, today, I if you haven't heard it, I wanted to share real briefly at the beginning here my salvation story. I grew up in a broken home. My parents were divorced when I was very young. Matter of fact, I don't remember my parents ever being together. Most of my childhood, I remember being shuffled back and forth to my dad's place on the weekend and spending time with him at that time, and in the summers with him, and then my mom pretty much took care of me. I mean, she provided for everything. My mom was a single mom for most of my childhood. I have an older brother and two older sisters from her first marriage, so I was the second marriage, and a lot going on there and everything, and so just like any young man, I searched for a lot of things. I had friends. I was busy doing a lot of stuff and just trying to figure out life. I wasn't sure what I thought about God for a long time. I had gone to vacation Bible school and stuff like that as a kid because friends would invite me and stuff, and went to church with grandma sometimes. And I want to tell you something. You grandparents, listen to me. Don't underestimate the value and the power of taking your children to church. Even if your children are far from the faith, get your grandchildren, take them to church. Like buy them Bibles, right? Do stuff for them. Instill your faith even in your grandchildren, even if your children aren't doing it. But I remember just some things going on in my life when I was 16 years old. My dad, who was my hero growing up, he was the guy. I mean, I wouldn't play golf with him. I was a Redskin fan because he was a Redskin fan. I'm a Duke fan because he was a Duke fan. Everything about me came in a lot of ways from my dad. My name, we have the exact same name. He's Aubrey Neal Grimes the first, and I'm Aubrey Neal Grimes the second. And so you're talking this. When I turned 16 years old, I had my car, I had a job, and I was driving. I could go see my dad anytime I wanted to, and I did. And I just remember there was one Friday night, I drove to see my dad, and I got there, and he wasn't there, and I was like, well, I'll just go on to bed. Maybe he'll be in later, and he didn't come in. And the next morning, I woke up and he was there, and we got to talking, and he said, I need to tell you something. And I said, what happened? He said, I got arrested. And my dad, for the first time in my life, there was a flaw for me. And I don't know if you know what it's like to have a hero in your life that all of a sudden, man, that it's like, what's going on here? And he began to share with me what had happened and why he was arrested, and he denied every bit of it. But it was the first time he had been arrested for what eventually now has put him in prison. I'm very open with you guys about that. My dad is serving 29 years in correctional facilities in Raleigh right now for child abuse, and so that was the first time that it was ever connected to him. And man, that sent my world into a tailspin because all the things that I thought was okay wasn't okay anymore. I was just like, a lot of the security that I had, I was like Linus with that security blanket, and that blanket kind of got taken away from me. And so I was just kind of questioning a lot of things, and I was still trying to do my own thing, And then going to my junior year, and I had this English teacher named Mr. Anderson, and we kind of talked about that before. You probably heard this story before, but he began talking about the importance of going to church. Now, he said that you need to go, he said, boys, y'all need to go to church because that's where the pretty girls are. And I'm thinking, man, I don't have a pretty girl. I need to go to church. And shortly after, so he had me thinking, And But shortly after that, I did what any good 16-year-old would do. I totaled my first car. Did a good job of that one, tore it up really good. And so I got the joy of driving my stepfather's mother's old car, a 69 white Impala, to school and back, which I love. I want to tell you something. Listen, I didn't like the look of it, but man, I could open that thing up on Groomtown Road there in Greensboro, and I was going, buddy. And it was fun. But I began to search and try to figure out life. And so I came home one day, and I told my mom, I said, based on what I'm hearing, I need to check out church. I need to go. And so I didn't know what to do or what to wear, so we went and actually bought. Because, see, I grew up, I had two suits growing up. I had a funeral suit and a wedding suit. Somebody died, we wore that one. And somebody got married, we wore that one. And I didn't have anything to wear, so we went and got me some slacks and a tie and that kind of thing, because we thought, that's what you wear when you go to church at that time. And so we went, and man, I began to listen to what the preacher was saying. I began to try to figure out trying to understand what it is that he wanted me to know. And at the end of the service, they did this thing called an altar call, and we do that every once in a while here. We don't do it real consistently, but and I began to sense something was weird going on with me. Every time that music would play and that preacher would say, if you confess Jesus before people, he will confess you before his Father in heaven. But if you deny him before people, he'll deny you before his Father in heaven. And I began to all of a sudden, it's like, man, it's starting to get tense in here. It's hitting easy stuff going on here. And that old wooden pew, buddy, I was gripping that thing, man. I'm surprised that my knuckles weren't bleeding, And it was I just remember all the emotions of that. And I remember dealing with trying to figure out, do I want to be a part of this? Do I want this? And I would wrestle with it weekly. And I remember on a Saturday night, I wanted to make sure that if I was going to do this, if I was going to make this decision to follow Jesus, that one, I didn't want it to be emotional. I didn't want it to be something. Listen, I'm working all this stuff out in my head. And I drive my wife crazy the way I think, by the way. I just think through a lot of things. So I was really just trying to work this whole thing out. And I also didn't want to make it because my mama wanted me to make it. Because my mom was really kind of pushing me toward it. And I was just like, and my mom wasn't feeling well that night. She said that she wasn't going to be able to go to church the next day. And I was like, if I'm going to give my life to Jesus, the next day is going to be the day, because I'm going to have to get up and drive myself to church as a 16-year-old. And the next day, that was January 17th, 1987. That was that Saturday night. I always say that January 18th, 1987 is the day I gave my life to Jesus. But January 17th, 1987 was the night that I decided that the next day, when he gives that altar call, I'm going. There was a volitional choice that was made that night. A choice that was made that I was going to do what God was calling me to do, which was to give my life to him. And the next day, when that hymn invitation was played and the music begins to start and the preacher begins to say what he was going to say, I always say this, I stepped out of the pew and Jesus stepped into me, is the way I describe it. Because I don't remember a thing after that. I don't remember praying a prayer. I don't remember even talking to the preacher. I just know this, that day my life was changed forever. Now, many of us may have similar stories here in this room. Similar stories of salvation where maybe it was in a church that happened for you, or maybe it was like my wife, it was in her home with her daddy, leading her to the Lord, or whatever it might have been, whatever your testimony may have been. We all here today have some type of experience with God. You're not here today if you have not none of you are in this room today if at some time in your life you didn't have some type of encounter with God, or at least had an encounter with God's people. Because you wouldn't be here today. Listen, I want to tell you something. I didn't go to church that Sunday without having an encounter with somebody, with one of God's people. I had an encounter with several of God's people that got me to that place. And so there are choices that are being made in our lives on a regular basis about following Jesus. Today, I want to preach a message that may not have any life application for you at all. That's not the goal today. The goal today is for you to get to know the Jesus that you said you wanted to follow. I want to tell you something, it's really crucial for us. And some of you out there are contemplating, maybe you're not a believer today, and you're contemplating, do I want to follow this Jesus? Because I want you to understand something today. Many of us made a choice to follow Jesus, and many of us are sitting there thinking, I don't know that I made the right choice, because you're really not following him. Are we here right now? I need you to hear me and what I'm about to tell you. Because we want to follow Jesus. How many would say, I want to follow Jesus? Would agree with that. You want to follow him. So we're going to be talking about that today. So today is going to be about who Jesus is. Who is this Jesus and what is he asking of us? What are we supposed to be doing? Because I want to tell you something, it's very important for us to understand this today here in Matthew chapter 8. So if you've turned to Matthew chapter 8, if you would, please stand in the honor of reading of God's word. Matthew chapter 8, beginning in verse 34. If I'm in the right place here. No, not 34, 18. Verse 18, we're going to read through verse 34. It says, now when Jesus saw a crowd around him, he gave orders to depart to the other side of the sea. Then a scribe came to him and said, Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. Jesus said to him, the foxes have holes and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Another disciple said to him, Lord, permit me first to go and bury my father. But Jesus said to him, follow me and allow the dead to bury their own dead. When he got into the boat, his disciples followed him, and behold, there arose a great storm on the sea, and so that the boat was being covered with the waves, but Jesus himself was asleep. And they came to him and woke him, saying, Save us, Lord, we are perishing. He said to them, Why are you afraid, you men of little faith? Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the sea, and it became perfectly calm. The men were amazed and said, What kind of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? We almost need to be saying that about Jesus. What kind of man is this we're following? When he came to the other side of the country of the Gadarenes, 2 men were demon-possessed, met him as they were coming out of the tombs. They were so extremely violent that no one could pass by that way. And they cried out, saying, What business do you have with each What business do we have with each other, Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time? Now there were a herd of many swine feeding at a distance from them. The demons began to entreat him, saying, If you are going to cast us out, send us into the herd of swine. And he said to them, Go. And they came out and went into the swine, and the whole herd rushed down to the steep bank into the sea and perished in the waters. The herdsmen ran away and went into the city and reported everything, including what had happened to the demoniacs. And behold, the whole city came out to meet Jesus. And when they saw him, they implored him to leave their region. They were like, You need to get out of here. We don't want you. We're not sure about you. May God bless the reading of his word. You can be seated. Everything in this passage can be summed up in this statement: Jesus has sovereign authority in our lives. He has sovereign authority in our lives. Today we're going to take a look at 3 different situations. Each of them is important for our discussion. One is the authority that Jesus demands over our lives. Secondly, the authority that Jesus has over storms, disasters, and destruction. And then thirdly, the authority that Jesus has over the devil and demons. And they're very important for us to understand these today, because this is very important, and it goes to who we are following. If we're following Jesus today, if you are a follower of Jesus, you call yourself a follower of Jesus, you're saying, you know what, at some time in my life, I gave my life to Christ, or right now I am saying that I'm a Christian, I am a follower of Jesus. This first thing is real important. I need you to understand with me. First thing is this: Jesus demands authority over our lives. Guys, it's not a suggestion, it's not an idea, it's not a proposal, it's a demand. He demands authority over our lives. Verses 18 through 22, if you'll follow along with me here in this story. Here's the situation. 2 men come to Jesus and say that they want to follow him. The response that Jesus gives them is that this is not going to be an easy thing. I want you to understand something. If somebody told you that all you have to do is follow Jesus and everything will work out fine, they sold you a bill of goods. And I want to tell you something. Listen, it's bad. It is not easy following Jesus. If you think that that's the goal in life, is I accept Jesus and everything goes smooth from here forward, I want to tell you something. You are in for trouble. We need to understand that following Jesus is not the easy way. It's not the easy way out. Jesus isn't, and think about this. When he says this, Jesus isn't begging for followers. He's not begging you to follow him. Matter of fact, can I tell you something? God don't need you. Did you know that? God don't need you. He's got all of creation that give him glory. He don't need you to give him glory. You need him. You know, and that's real important for us to understand today. He's not begging for followers. You can't just push. Remember the old Staples commercials? You just can't push the easy button and follow Jesus. He's demanding authority over our lives. Let's take a look at these 2 different men that come to him. The first man, there in verses 18 and 19, this guy says, I want to go. I will follow you. I'm going to follow you, Jesus. I'll go wherever you want to go. This is a very common commitment that people make. There are many people that have come into churches and that I have run into over time that have made a similar commitment to Jesus. They've walked an aisle of the church. They've signed a card. They've joined a church. They've been a part of a movement. They've gone to a revival, and they've said, I want to follow Jesus. A lot of people say they want to follow Jesus. I feel like Jesus is reading this guy's mail when you take a look at this. I think that he knew that this guy didn't know what he was getting into. It was as if Jesus said, are you sure this is what you want to do? Are you sure you want to do this? You know, sometimes, I've actually had someone who has come to church before, and they looked at me and they said, what you're telling me, I don't want that. They wanted the freedom of forgiveness of sin, but they didn't want the requirement of obedience. You all right? Listen to what he says. Here's what Jesus tells him. He says, the foxes have holes and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. There are a lot of people who say they want to follow Jesus, but do they really want to follow him? I think of the parable of the sower and the seed being sown on the rocky soil and on the path and in the thorns, and some sown on good soil. There are many who will receive the word and will receive will say, hey, I want to do it. I want to follow him. But all of a sudden they find themselves off path, not following him. We see this play out, don't we? People come and then they don't continue. People pray and they don't persist. They don't persevere to the end. They fall away from the faith. My question to you today is whether or not they were followers in the first place. It is a tough thing to follow Jesus. It is not an easy thing. The call is difficult. Jesus is basically saying, if you follow me, I'm all you've got. I'm all you got. We come to Jesus to get Jesus. I need you to understand something today. When you come to Jesus, you come to get Jesus. You don't come to get an easier way of life. You don't come to get a ooey-gooey feeling. You come to get him. You come to get Jesus. We don't come to Jesus to get blessings, even though we get them when we come. But we need to understand, you can't have the king's inheritance without having the king. Y'all all right? You got to have him first. If you want what comes with him, you got to have him. He is who we are following. He is who God has called us to. So we have this common commitment that is made by people. Well, we also have something else going on here with this second man. Take a look at him there in verses 21 and 22. This guy says, I'll follow you too, Lord, but how many know that once you say the word but, it cancels out everything that was said before it? Now, that's basic English. So how many people, if somebody say, I love you, but he's saying, I'll follow you, but let me first go and bury my father. See, this guy sounds real noble too, doesn't he? Sounds real noble. You know what? Listen, I'll follow you, Jesus, but let me go take care of my family first. My family needs to come ahead of following you. Now, listen, I'm a family guy, and I love my family, and listen, I put my family ahead of a lot of things, but I don't put my family ahead of following Jesus. Okay? Jesus comes first. Then my family comes after that, but Jesus comes first. And here he's saying, this guy sounds real noble. He says, let me first go take care of my dad first. But that's not what's happening here, because it sounds noble to say, you know, my family. This sounds real noble. But that's not what this guy's saying. What this guy thought he needed, what this guy thought he needed to follow Jesus was security. He thought he needed security. See, the security he thought he needed was found in his dad's inheritance. You need to understand something. This man, the reason why he was waiting to about follow, he was going to delay following Jesus, was kind of like, let me go bury my dad so I can make sure that I have an income so that I can afford to follow you. Let me make sure that I go get that done first. Jesus is saying, if you follow me, I am your security. See, this is a typical excuse for people in following Jesus. One, in salvation, many people, they make the excuse, well, I want to be a follower of Jesus, but let me try it my way first. Or, well, I want to be a follower of Jesus, but let me enjoy my sin first. I can always accept him at the last hour. The problem with that, but hey, listen, the problem with that is you don't know when the last hour is going to be. I guarantee you that those people who walked into that church last Sunday, there in Texas, none of them, not a one of them knew if that was the last hour of their life. And there's no telling there's no telling what they may have been thinking about. And I don't know what you're thinking about today. Maybe you're thinking about the ball game this afternoon or what you're going to eat for lunch, but I want to understand something. You better be thinking about eternity. This typical excuse in regards to salvation. See, the result, listen, is eternity separated from God when you make that excuse. How about this? The typical excuse in regards to obedience. I will follow Jesus, but first let me. I hear this a lot, and I want to follow Jesus, but first let me get my college degree. After I get my college degree, then I'll do what he called me to do. Or let me first, and I hear this, listen to me, and it sounds noble. I will follow Jesus, but let me first get married. I will follow Jesus, but let me first get my children. I'll follow Jesus, but let me get my children out of the household. I'll follow Jesus, but let me spend more time with my grandchildren. And before you know it, the thing that God called you to do, this thing that God has called you to do, all of a sudden time is over. And you look back on your life and it's regret because, listen, God called you to do something and you just kept making excuse after excuse after excuse. And you're just like this man. And you never followed him. You got stuck in the cruise control of the American dream. When God has called you to something greater. That may not be you this morning. But it might. What have you been waiting to get done before you do what God has called you to do? I heard this said this week, and I love it. Jesus doesn't need our success, but he wants our surrender. Y'all all right? Come on. Listen, y'all can't get mad at me about that one. He don't need our success. He wants our surrender. What are we surrendering to? What are you waiting to get completed in your life before you finally look at Jesus and say, okay, I'll do what you called me to do? To follow Jesus is to submit to his authority over your provision and over your security. Next thing. Everybody's like, I'm glad he's moving on. Jesus now in verses 23 through 27 is what we learn about Jesus. He demonstrates his authority over storms and disaster. You know, we've faced a lot of storms and disaster in recent days in our world, things that many of us wish we never even knew about. Many things maybe you've even gone through personally. The response of the disciples is key for our understanding today. See, we could focus on the storm, and many times there are many sermons that I've even heard preached on the storms that are coming in our lives and things like that, and that's good. You know, we could even focus on was this a hurricane or not, or how high the waves might have been. Were they were they going over the boat or whatever? A lot of times the storm gets our attention. And that happens in real life, doesn't it? Whatever it is that comes in our life, the tragedy, the disease, the disaster, whatever it is, gets our complete attention, and the focus begins to shift onto the storm. And when that begins to happen, a lot of times the storm gets our all. It gets our awe. It gets our amazement. It gets our attention. Wow, I cannot believe this storm. I cannot believe this happened. But see, the storm is not the point of the story. The storms of our life, divorce, disease, disaster, are not the point of your story either. The point of this story is Jesus is God and He is in charge. That's the point of this story. He has complete authority in this situation and in our situation. Here, listen to what they said. Here's what the disciples said. Here's what they said. Listen. What kind of man is this, that even the winds and sea obey him? Wow. I mean, it's like the focus all of a sudden, listen, the focus, you would think that the focus would be on the storm. I mean, and an amazement of that. No, it's what kind of man is this, that even the winds and obey, the winds the winds and the waves would obey him. The shift comes quickly. Think about this. There is no promise. Listen to me. There's no promise in this story or anywhere else in the Bible that says that disasters, terror attacks, and storms in this world will come to an end. Which means this, listen to me. Your cancer or somebody else's cancer may not go away. Your marriage might not get better. Your life might not improve. Your circumstances might not get better. Yeah, listen, your income may never go up. The promise in this story and in your story is that no matter what you go through, listen to me, no matter what storms may come, Jesus is still completely in charge. The confidence and faith that the disciples had was that Jesus was still in the boat. You can have faith today because Jesus is still in your boat. That's the Jesus we follow. That's the one we follow. See, we don't ever need to be afraid of what might happen in this world. You don't need to be. You don't need to be afraid of it. Jesus has authority over all of it. If He has authority over the wind and the waves, He has authority over your pain, over your suffering, over your disaster, and even over shootings in churches in Texas. Jesus has authority over it. God is not wringing His hands saying, "What am I to do?" He's still in charge. Faith isn't believing that difficulty won't come my way. Faith is trusting that Jesus has sovereign authority over whatever is happening. We used to tell children in our children's ministry back home, faith is trusting God no matter what. So no matter what happens in your life, you can trust Him. We can trust God no matter what we face in life. Why? Because He has complete sovereign authority over it. The third thing, Jesus, in this passage of Scripture, Jesus demonstrates authority over demons, and I will add, and the devil. Verses 28 through 34, you have this encounter happening where these two men, they are being violently possessed by demons. Now, that's kind of foreign to us in our culture most of the time. I mean, most of us in this room have probably never met someone who is demon-possessed, or we may have and we just didn't know it. most of us have never faced that in our lifetime. But in this culture, it was very, very real. Things were happening like that. And it still happens around our world. But these two men are being violently possessed by demons. These demons are scared of Jesus. I want to tell you something. That tells you who just walked into the room. Jesus walks into the situation, and all of a sudden, these demons who have been scaring everybody else, all of a sudden, they're the ones who are terrified. They're the ones who are scared. It's kind of like when the bully is beating up on the little guy at school, and all of a sudden the teacher walks into the room, or the principal walks into the room. All of a sudden the bully's a little bit nervous, right? Well, that's what's happening here. Is they're just kind of bullying this whole neighborhood, and then the boss walks in. His name happens to be Jesus. These demons are scared of him. They're like, hey, send us to the pigs. The demons tell us a couple of things about Jesus in this story. One is, they are powerless to do anything apart from Jesus. They're also powerless to do anything apart from Jesus' permission. They couldn't just leave who they were in and go to those pigs without the permission of God. Satan can do nothing. David Platt said this, and I like this. Satan can do nothing in this world and nothing in your life apart from the sovereign permission of God. So I was preparing this week. I was riding down the road, and I heard a conversation about something else, and it was talking about a vice president in an organization. And they used this statement, and they said that he had influence, but he didn't have authority. And I was like, man, that just sounds like the devil. I want you to hear me. Listen to me. The devil has influence, but he has zero authority. Do you understand that today? He has zero authority in your life or even in this world. He has influence, but he doesn't have authority. Jesus has authority. Second thing is, the demons had fear because of their belief. What? They believed Jesus could destroy them. Think about this. In contrast, we fear because of our unbelief. If we knew what the demons know, we would not be so afraid of what might happen to us in this world. You all right? Jesus has sovereign authority in our lives. He does. Nothing can happen in your life apart from the sovereign power and authority of God. And nothing can happen in your life apart from His sovereign will. We have a hope. We have a hope that even the demons know about. In verse 29 of chapter 8, it says that the demons cried out, saying, "What business do we have with each other, Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?" Here's our hope. There's a time coming. There's a time coming. How many would agree that there's a time coming? I mean, think about that. There's a time coming. Matthew 25:41 says, "Then he will also say to those on his left, 'Depart from me, accursed ones, into eternal fire, which has been prepared for the devil and his angels.'" I want you to understand there's a time coming for the devil and his angels. There's a time coming for us too. But there's a time coming for the devil and his angels. Revelation 21:4, "And he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. And there will no longer be any death, and no longer be any mourning, nor crying, or pain. The first things have passed away." There's a time coming When, even though right now there's no promise of it passing in our current state, there's a time coming where it'll be no more. There's a promise of that coming. Why? Because Jesus has sovereign authority over it all. Today, my desire for you is, if you don't know Christ today, follow Jesus. I'm not going to promise you that the road will be easy. Matter of fact, I bet there's some people in this room who would tell you the same thing. It's not going to be easy. It's not filled with puppy dogs and rainbows. How many would like, don't you wish it was that easy? Sometimes you feel like, I really would like to get a break. It's not. And there's going to be battles. There's going to be fights. There's going to be hurt, and there's going to be pain. And it's all going to be to do with your own issues most of the time. And you're going to have to work through those things. And God was one. Listen, in the journey that you're going to go on, you're going to live without regrets if you follow Him. Now, the other side of this. What's God called you to do, believer? Those of you who come to faith in Jesus. Those who've given your life to Christ. There was a time in your life, maybe there was a time in your life where God said, I want you to do this. And for some reason, and I don't know what it may have been, you put the command of God, the call of God on hold. You don't know how many people I've met like that. Or God may have called you into full-time ministry. Or God may have called you to do a certain thing in your community. Or God may have called you to do a certain thing in a church, or whatever it might have been. And you've put it on hold and you said, you know what, I need to wait until I get my career established, or I need to wait until I achieve my bucket list. And then I'll do what He told me to do. Here's what needs to happen. I'm going to speak frankly. You need to get rid of your bucket list and make Jesus your bucket list. I personally, Les and I talked about this, I don't ever want to live my life with regret of not doing what God has asked me to do. I don't want to live like that. I want to follow Him to the fullest extent that I can, that I'm able to. And then possibly even do what I'm not even able to do. So here's the invitation today. If you don't know Jesus and you want to give Him your life, I'm going to invite you in just a few moments. Leslie's going to come and play. I'm going to invite you in just a few moments to come, leave your seat, leave your sin, and come to Jesus. And maybe you're sitting out there and you're like, "That's, Pastor, you've been talking about me today." God has called me a long time ago. God called me and has given me a mission to do, and I've been disobedient because I've been waiting for the right time. I want you to understand, listen, the time is now. Will you be obedient? Maybe you need to get in this altar and pray and do business with God today. When I was in college, I had to make a choice. Did I want to be a teacher and hope to get to coach middle school basketball? Or did I want to surrender my life to Jesus in the call to full-time ministry? You know today that I'm not a basketball coach or a teacher. Guys, I do not regret my decision to go into full-time ministry. I don't know. Listen, I'm not saying that you're called to full. It might be something that God has told you to do. Don't wait. Don't wait. Don't run out of time.